morning air felt crisp as Elena Chen walked up the stone steps of Westfield High School. She clutched her worn leather bag tightly, a habit from years of carrying precious sheet music. Today it held only lesson plans and a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. As she pushed through the heavy front doors, the familiar smell of floor polish and teenage perfume greeted her. The hallway buzzed with early morning energy, students slamming lockers, teachers balancing coffee cups, and the distant sound of a saxophone being practiced somewhere down the corridor. "You must be Ms. Chen," a friendly voice called out. A woman with curly gray hair and bright eyes approached her. "I'm Judy, the office manager. We're so glad you could fill in on such short notice." Elena smiled politely. "Happy to help. English literature has always been close to my heart." This wasn't a lie exactly. Before her hands had found their way to piano keys, they had turned the pages of books. Literature had been her first love before music swept her away. "Let me show you to the teacher's lounge before your first class," Judy offered, leading her through the maze of hallways. The lounge was cozy, with mismatched furniture that somehow worked together. A coffee machine gurgled in the corner, and a plate of homemade cookies sat on the center table with a handwritten note. "Welcome, new faces." From the home ec department, several teachers looked up as they entered. A tall man with a bow tie stood immediately, extending his hand. "Tom Baker, History. You're our new sub for Mrs. Wilson, right?" "Elena Chen," she replied, her handshake firm but brief. "Just for the semester while Mrs. Wilson recovers." "Well, we're happy to have you," a younger woman chimed in. "I'm Grace. I teach biology next door to your classroom. If you need anything, just knock." Elena thanked them and took a seat slightly apart from the main group. She pulled out her notebook and began reviewing her lesson plans, hoping the slight distance would discourage further conversation. It wasn't that she disliked people, quite the opposite. But over the years, she'd learned that keeping to herself was easier than answering questions about her past. Throughout the morning, other faculty members introduced themselves. Elena responded with practiced politeness, enough to seem friendly but not enough to invite deeper connection. By lunchtime, she had declined 2 invitations to join different groups at local restaurants, and had settled at a quiet table in the corner of the cafeteria with her packed lunch and a novel. Her first day of classes went smoothly enough. The students were curious about their new teacher, but respectful. Elena found herself genuinely enjoying the discussions about Scout's perspective and Atticus Finch's moral compass. For a few hours, she almost forgot about the weight she carried, the one that had nothing to do with the books in her bag. As the final bell rang, Elena gathered her things and headed toward the exit. She was nearly there when she heard the unmistakable sound of a piano being played, somewhat clumsily, from the music room. Her feet stopped of their own accord, her body responding to the music before her mind could object. Almost in a trance, she followed the sound down the hall. The door to the music room stood slightly ajar, and through the gap she could see a group of teachers gathered around an upright piano. A man with wild graying hair was attempting to play what she immediately recognized as Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, and not doing it justice. "It's too difficult." "Richard," a woman in a floral dress sighed, "we need something simpler for the faculty showcase. None of us can play this well enough, but it's perfect for the theme." The man, Richard, protested. "The piece tells a story, it builds drama, it requires skill none of us have," another teacher cut in. "Mrs. Peterson was our only real pianist, and now she's out with pneumonia." Elena knew she should walk away. Every instinct told her to turn around, go home, and forget what she'd heard. But something, perhaps the butchering of a piece she once performed to standing ovations, made her push the door open slightly wider. The hinges creaked and all heads turned in her direction. "Oh, Ms. Chen, isn't it?" Richard's face lit up. Come in, come in. I'm Richard West, music department head." "I was just passing by," Elena explained, already regretting her curiosity. "Perfect timing," Richard exclaimed, either missing or ignoring her reluctance. "We're in quite a bind. Our annual faculty showcase is in 2 weeks, and our pianist is ill." "That's unfortunate," Elena murmured, taking a small step backward. But Richard was already studying her hands. Musicians always noticed each other's hands. Elena instinctively curled her fingers as if hiding the calluses that years of playing had left behind. "Those are a pianist's hands if I ever saw them," Richard said triumphantly. "Do you play?" A loaded question. Did she play? Once she had played for royalty. Once her name had appeared on marquees in the greatest concert halls across 3 continents. Once critics had called her fingers magic weavers of emotion. A little, she answered softly, just as a hobby. The lie felt bitter on her tongue, but it was one she had told many times in the past 3 years. A little is all we need. Richard clapped his hands together. Our showcase this year highlights hidden stories, pieces that tell tales without words. This Rachmaninoff prelude is perfect, but none of us can do it justice. The woman in the floral dress, who introduced herself as Diane, the choir director, gave Elena a sympathetic look. Don't let him pressure you. It's a difficult piece, if only they knew. Elena had performed this particular prelude countless times, including once for the composer's grandson. Her fingers could find the notes in complete darkness. I could try, I suppose, she said hesitantly, but I'm very rusty. I haven't played seriously in a long time, Richard beamed. Wonderful. Why don't you give it a go now, just to see where we stand? Before she could protest, he was guiding her to the piano bench. The other teachers stepped back, giving her space. Elena sat down, adjusting the bench by habit. Her hands hovered above the keys, and for a moment she was back at Steinway Hall, preparing for her debut recital. With a small breath, she forced herself to remember her current role. New substitute teacher. Amateur pianist at best. She needed to play well enough to be believable, but poorly enough to maintain her cover. She began the famous opening chords deliberately, playing them correctly, but with hesitation. As the piece progressed to its more complicated sections, she inserted carefully planned mistakes. A fumbled run here, a missed note there. She played at half the tempo she was capable of, making it seem like she was struggling with the technical demands. When she finished, she looked up to find Richard watching her with a mixture of relief and concern. Well, you certainly know the piece, he said slowly, but you weren't kidding about being rusty. Diane stepped forward. Maybe we could simplify some passages? Or slow it down for the performance? Elena nodded, feeling a strange mix of shame and relief at her deliberate mediocrity. I could practice more before the showcase. It's just been so long. 2 weeks should be enough time to brush up, Richard decided. We rehearse every afternoon at 4.
Can you join us?
Elena hesitated. Every day for 2 weeks meant more opportunities for someone to see through her act. But something about sitting at the piano again, even while playing poorly on purpose, had awakened a long dormant part of her. Her fingers tingled with the memory of what they could really do. I'll be here, she promised quietly. As the group dispersed, Elena remained at the piano, lightly touching the keys without pressing them down. When she thought everyone had left, she allowed herself to play just 4 measures. Perfectly, brilliantly, the way she used to play them on stages around the world. That sounded much better, a voice said from the doorway. Elena's hands jerked away from the keys. A janitor stood there, mop in hand, watching her with curious eyes. Just a lucky moment, she said quickly, gathering her things. Muscle memory, I guess. The janitor nodded, but something in his expression made Elena wonder if he suspected more. She hurried past him, her heart pounding. Back in her car, Elena sat with her hands gripping the steering wheel. What had she gotten herself into? For 3 years, she had carefully constructed a new life away from spotlights and expectations, away from the memories that had driven her from the stage in the first place. Now, in trying to blend in, she had accidentally put herself center stage again, even if it was just a high school faculty showcase. As she drove home to her small apartment, Elena wondered if she could maintain the charade for 2 weeks. Playing badly on purpose was, ironically, one of the hardest things she'd ever had to do. Every instinct in her body fought against it. That night after dinner, she opened the closet in her spare bedroom. Behind winter coats and boxes of books sat a keyboard she hadn't touched in months. She pulled it out, plugged it in, and played the Rachmaninoff piece from beginning to end. Flawlessly, passionately, the way it deserved to be played. Then, with a sigh, she began to practice her mistakes. The faculty lounge buzzed with conversation as Elena poured herself a cup of coffee. 1 week had passed since she'd agreed to play for the showcase, and word had spread quickly among the staff. She could feel curious eyes on her as she stirred in a splash of cream. "So you're our piano hero," a voice said behind her. Elena turned to find a tall woman with short silver hair extending her hand. "Vivian Reed, Art Department. Everyone's talking about how you're saving the showcase. Hardly a hero, Elena replied with a forced smile. Just trying to help out. Well, Richard hasn't stopped singing your praises. Though he did mention you might need some practice time. Vivian's eyes held no judgment, just friendly interest. The piano in the art studio is out of tune, but you're welcome to use it if you need extra hours. Thank you, Elena said, genuinely touched by the offer. The one in the music room is enough for now. As she made her way to her first class, Elena reflected on the past week's rehearsals. She'd carefully crafted her performance to show gradual improvement, playing a little better each day, but still inserting strategic mistakes. The balance was delicate. Too much improvement would raise suspicions. Too little would frustrate the music department. Her students had settled into a rhythm with her teaching style, and Elena found herself enjoying their lively discussions about literature. Today they were debating the use of symbolism in The Great Gatsby, and their enthusiasm was contagious. Ms. Chen, do you think the green light really represents the American dream? Or is it just about Gatsby's love for Daisy? Asked a thoughtful girl in the back row. Elena considered the question. What do you think it could be if not those things? Maybe it's about hope itself, the student suggested. Not tied to any specific dream, just the idea that there's always something better waiting ahead. Elena smiled. That's a beautiful interpretation. Literature is powerful because symbols can hold different meanings for different readers. For a moment she thought of music, how a single piece could speak differently to each listener. How Rachmaninoff might have meant one thing with his prelude, but audiences found their own stories within the notes. The thought stayed with her through lunch, where she sat with Vivian and a few other teachers who had gradually coaxed her out of her solitude. They chatted about upcoming tests and school politics, normal teacher talk that made Elena feel almost like a regular person again. How's the Rachmaninoff coming along? Vivian asked as they finished their meals. Slowly, Elena admitted, which wasn't entirely a lie. Deliberately playing poorly was its own kind of challenge. You know, said Peter, a physics teacher with kind eyes. My daughter struggled with piano for years. Her teacher always said some pieces just aren't meant for certain players. No shame in admitting if it's too difficult. Elena nodded politely, fighting back the urge to explain that she had once performed this very piece with the London Philharmonic. Instead, she said, I'm hoping I can do it justice by next week. After school, Elena headed to the music room for rehearsal. Richard greeted her with less enthusiasm than usual, and Diane looked outright worried. Elena, Richard began as she set her bag down. We've been talking, and we're concerned about the piece. I know I made some mistakes yesterday, Elena said quickly. The middle section is coming along. It's not just that, Diane interrupted gently. The showcase is in 1 week, and frankly, we're worried this piece might be too ambitious. Richard nodded. I have a simplified arrangement we could use instead. Same piece, just less demanding. Elena felt a pang of genuine frustration. The irony wasn't lost on her, being offered a simplified version of a piece she could play in her sleep. I'd like to try once more with the original, she insisted. Please. With reluctant nods, they let her take her place at the piano. Elena began to play, allowing herself to improve noticeably from yesterday but still holding back significantly. She fumbled through a particularly difficult run, then stopped with a convincing sigh of frustration. See? Richard said gently. There's no shame in admitting this piece is challenging. Professional pianists spend years mastering it. Elena bit her tongue. Years ago, she had mastered it in under a month. Let me show you the alternative, Richard continued, pulling out sheet music with fewer notes per page. It captures the essence without the technical demands. As he demonstrated the simplified version, Elena felt something crack inside her. The watered-down arrangement stripped away everything that made the piece powerful. The drama, the intensity, the raw emotion, all reduced to basic chords and simplified melodies. What do you think? Richard asked hopefully. It's different, Elena managed, unable to hide her disappointment. Different but playable, Diane added cheerfully. We want you to shine, not struggle. Elena took the simplified sheets, feeling a strange sense of loss. I'll look it over tonight. As she packed up, she overheard whispers from the choir section where several teachers were gathering for their rehearsal. Poor thing. Richard really put her on the spot. Might embarrass herself. Should have asked about her experience level first. Heat rose to Elena's cheeks. Not from embarrassment at being thought incapable, but from the strain of maintaining this facade. Every fiber of her being wanted to sit down and show them exactly what her fingers could do. The janitor, the same one who had caught her playing perfectly the week before, was mopping nearby. Glancing at her occasionally with an unreadable expression, Elena hurried out, clutching the simplified music sheets so tightly they crumpled in her hands. That evening in her apartment, Elena placed both versions of the music side by side on her keyboard. She played through the simplified version once, cringing at its emptiness. Then almost angrily she launched into the original, playing it at full tempo, with all the passion and technical brilliance she had once been famous for. Her fingers flew across the keys, drawing out every nuance, every color, every emotion Rachmaninoff had embedded in the notes. As the final chord resonated, she realized her cheeks were wet with tears. 3 years ago, after the accident, she had promised herself she would never perform again. The music brought back too many memories, too much pain. She had walked away from concert halls and recording contracts, disappeared so completely that former colleagues thought she had died along with... Elena shook her head, refusing to finish the thought. She closed the keyboard lid gently and went to make tea, trying to decide what to do. She could accept the simplified version and get through the showcase without drawing attention. She could make an excuse and back out entirely. Or she could reveal her true abilities and face all the questions that would follow. None of the options felt right. The next morning, Elena arrived early to find a note taped to her classroom door. "Ms. Chen, can we meet before first period?" "Richard." With a sigh, she headed to the music room. Richard was already there, looking apologetic. "Elena, I wanted to check in after yesterday," he began. "I sensed you were upset about the arrangement." She chose her words carefully. "I just feel like I'm letting everyone down." "Not at all," Richard insisted. "You stepped up when no one else could. But I've been thinking," he hesitated, "maybe we should find someone else. The school board president's son is quite accomplished, and you want to replace me?" Elena was surprised by the sting of rejection, even though logically this solved her problem. "Only because I can see how much stress this is causing you," Richard explained kindly. "Teaching is stressful enough without adding performance anxiety." Elena sat down on the piano bench, conflicted. Part of her was relieved. Another part felt strangely disappointed. "Could I have one more day to practice the original?" she asked suddenly. "Just one more try before you decide?" Richard looked surprised but nodded. "Of course. We have full rehearsal this afternoon. But Elena, no pressure, all right? Music should bring joy, not anxiety." Music had once been her greatest joy, then her greatest pain. Now it was, what, a secret? A wound? A memory? Throughout her classes that day, Elena was distracted. Students had to repeat questions, and she lost her place in discussions several times. During lunch, she skipped the faculty lounge and found a quiet corner of the library instead. There, she closed her eyes and played the piece in her mind, her fingers twitching slightly as they followed phantom keys. By the time the final bell rang, she had made her decision. The music room was full when she arrived, not just the usual music department staff, but several other teachers who had come to watch the full rehearsal. Elena noticed Vivian giving her an encouraging thumbs up from the back. "Everyone ready?" Richard called out. "We'll go in program order. Choir first, then band, then our soloists. Elena, you'll close the first half before intermission." As the rehearsal progressed, Elena sat quietly, barely registering the performances around her. The janitor was there again, supposedly changing light bulbs, but his eyes kept finding her. Finally, it was her turn. Richard introduced her with forced enthusiasm that couldn't quite hide his concern. "And now Elena Chen will perform." "Which version have you decided on, Elena?" She walked to the piano without answering, adjusted the bench and placed her hands on the keys. The room fell silent, expectant. Elena took a deep breath. She began to play, not the simplified version, but not her full ability either. She played like a talented amateur, someone who had studied piano seriously but never professionally. She made small mistakes but recovered gracefully. She shaped phrases musically but didn't access the emotional depths she was capable of reaching. It was a compromise, a middle ground between hiding completely and revealing too much. When she finished, the room erupted in surprised applause. Richard's jaw had dropped slightly and Diane was beaming. "Elena!" Richard exclaimed when the clapping died down. That was wonderful. What happened?" She shrugged, offering a small smile. I practiced last night. Well, whatever you did, keep doing it, he said, clearly relieved. That was perfect. Impressive without being intimidating for a school showcase. As the teachers gathered their things, chatting excitedly about her improvement, Elena caught the janitor watching her. He nodded once, a knowing look in his eyes, before pushing his cart out the door. She had survived another day without revealing her secret. But as the showcase drew nearer, Elena wondered how long she could continue walking this tightrope between her past and present selves. 3 days before the showcase, the school was buzzing with activity. Posters lined the hallways, the art department was designing programs, and teachers were staying late to perfect their performances. Elena had settled into a careful routine, playing well enough to keep Richard happy but never revealing her true capabilities. After her surprisingly good rehearsal, the music teachers had backed off, giving Elena space to practice on her own. She was grateful for the reprieve, though it came with a new complication: increased interest from the rest of the faculty. There she is, our piano prodigy, Peter called out good-naturedly as Elena entered the teacher's lounge Tuesday morning. Hardly a prodigy, Elena replied, pouring herself coffee. Just lucky. Richard says you made an incredible improvement practically overnight, Vivian said, making room for Elena at the table. He couldn't stop talking about it yesterday. Elena stirred her coffee slowly. I found a better way to practice, that's all. Well, whatever you did, it worked. Everyone's excited to hear you play on Friday. A knot formed in Elena's stomach. It's still not perfect. Perfect is boring, Vivian waved dismissively. The audience connects with performers who show a bit of humanity. Trust me, I've been to enough of my nephew's flawless recitals to know technically perfect can be technically dull. If only they knew. Elena had once received a scathing review that called her playing too perfect, lacking the vulnerability that makes art transcendent. That review had haunted her for months, pushing her to find deeper emotional connection in her performances. I just don't want to let anyone down, Elena said quietly. You won't, Vivian assured her. The fact that you care so much already puts you leagues ahead of Mr. Parker's recorder solo last year. The conversation shifted to other showcase acts, and Elena relaxed slightly. Maybe she could get through this after all. Just one performance, then back to her quiet life teaching literature. Her morning classes went smoothly, but by afternoon, Elena felt a growing unease. As her students worked on an in-class essay, she found herself drawing tiny piano keys in the margins of her notepad. Her fingers twitched, playing phantom notes. When the final bell rang, Elena headed to what should have been the last full rehearsal before the showcase. The music room was already crowded when she arrived, not just with music department staff but with several administrators, including the school principal. Ah, Elena, Richard called out, waving her over. Just in time. Dr. Wallace wanted to see a complete run-through today. The principal, a stern-looking woman with impeccable posture, nodded at Elena. I've heard promising things about your contribution. Ms. Chen. Thank you, Elena said, her mouth suddenly dry, though I'm still working out some rough spots. We all are, Richard laughed. That's what rehearsals are for. The rehearsal began with the choir, followed by a saxophone quartet, then Diane's vocal solo. Each performance was met with constructive criticism from Richard and occasional comments from Dr. Wallace. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as teachers realized this was more evaluation than practice. When it was Elena's turn, she sat at the piano with trembling hands, not from fear of performing. She had played for heads of state without a flutter of nerves, but from the strain of maintaining her charade under such scrutiny. She began the piece, aiming for the same level of competence she'd shown at the last rehearsal, not too perfect but musical and largely accurate. However, with each measure, she felt herself slipping. The music was pulling her in, asking for more than she was willing to give. When she reached the thunderous middle section, Elena instinctively leaned into the dynamics, her fingers finding more notes than she had intended to play. The sound swelled, filling the room with a richness that surprised even her. Alarmed at her lapse, she deliberately fumbled the next passage, breaking the spell. She recovered and finished the piece with restrained competence, but when she looked up, she found Richard staring at her with narrowed eyes. Dr. Wallace applauded politely. Very nice, Ms. Chen. With a few more days of practice, I'm sure you'll smooth out those inconsistencies. Richard approached the piano as the next performer set up. Elena, can I speak with you in the hallway? Her heart pounding, Elena followed him out of the music room. The hallway was empty except for the janitor, who was emptying trash cans further down. What happened in there? Richard asked quietly. I'm sorry about the mistakes. I'm not talking about the mistakes, Richard interrupted. I'm talking about that middle section. For a few measures you played like what? Elena asked, her voice barely audible. Like a completely different pianist. Richard ran a hand through his wild hair. I've been teaching music for 20 years, Elena. I know when someone is holding back. Elena stared at the floor, saying nothing. Why? Richard pressed. Why would you pretend to struggle when you can clearly play this piece? It's complicated, she whispered. Complicated, Richard repeated. Well, here's what's not complicated. The showcase is in 3 days. The school board will be there. The local newspaper, parents, students. His voice hardened. I need to know if you're going to play the way you did in that middle section, or if you're going to continue whatever game this is. Elena felt cornered. I can play the piece, Richard. I'll do a good job on Friday. A good job, he echoed. What does that mean exactly? Will you play like you did last rehearsal? Or will you play to your actual ability? When Elena didn't answer, Richard's expression darkened. Perhaps we should find someone else, he said. This showcase matters to a lot of people. Our music program's funding depends on it. I can't have a performer I don't trust. You can trust me to play well, Elena insisted, but not to play honestly. Richard shook his head. I'm sorry, Elena, but I think we need to go in a different direction. Dr. Wallace's son is home from college. He studied piano for years. You're replacing me? Elena interrupted, stung despite herself. 3 days before the showcase? You're leaving me no choice, Richard replied. I can't figure out what's going on with you, but I don't have time to solve the mystery before Friday. Hot tears pricked behind Elena's eyes, not from sadness, but from frustration. This was exactly why she'd left her old life behind. The expectations, the pressure, the feeling that her worth was measured only by what her fingers could do on the keys. Fine, she said stiffly. I understand. Richard's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I think you're very talented, Elena. More talented than you've let on. I just wish you'd been honest from the beginning. He turned and walked back into the music room, leaving Elena alone in the hallway. No, not alone. The janitor had moved closer during their conversation, pretending to dust a trophy case while clearly listening. When Richard was gone, he approached Elena. Tough break, he said simply. Elena wiped her eyes. It's for the best. The janitor, his name tag read Lou, studied her for a moment. Is it? Seems to me you've got a gift that's going to waste. It's not a waste to step away from something, Elena said defensively. People change careers all the time. True enough, Lou agreed. But most people don't hide what they're good at like it's something to be ashamed of. Elena stared at him. What do you know about it? I know I recognized you the first day you sat at that piano, Lou said quietly. My wife and I saw you at Carnegie Hall 5 years ago. Elena Chen, the poet of the piano. That's what they called you in the program. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. You're mistaken. No, ma'am, I'm not. You played Rachmaninoff that night, too. Different piece, though. A concerto. You got a standing ovation that lasted 10 minutes. Lou's eyes were kind but knowing. What I can't figure out is why someone who can play like that would pretend they can't. Elena leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. It's a long story. Most good ones are, Lou said. He glanced at his watch. My shift ends in 20 minutes. There's a coffee shop across the street. If you want to talk, I'll be there. He turned to go, then paused. For what it's worth, my wife cried during your performance that night. Said it was like hearing colors. As Lou pushed his cart down the hallway, Elena gathered her belongings from the music room, avoiding eye contact with everyone. She heard whispers as she left but couldn't bring herself to care. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Elena sat in her car staring at the steering wheel. Her phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. Heard what happened. Want to talk? Elena ignored it. She started the car, intending to drive home, but found herself pulling into the coffee shop parking lot instead. Lou was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups. When he saw Elena, he smiled slightly but didn't seem surprised. I got you tea. he said as she sat down. Seemed like you might need something calming. Thank you, Elena murmured, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. So, Lou said after a moment of silence. Want to tell me why a world-class pianist is hiding out as a substitute English teacher in a small-town high school? Elena took a deep breath. She hadn't told anyone the full story since it happened, but something about Lou's direct, unpitying gaze made her want to speak. There was an accident, she began softly. 3 years ago, after a concert in Vienna. Lou nodded, waiting. My husband was my manager, Elena continued, her voice steady despite the pain the words brought. He was also a cellist. We were in a taxi heading back to the hotel, talking about the performance. He was so proud. Her voice caught. The crash happened so fast. When I woke up in the hospital, they told me he was gone. I'm sorry, Lou said simply. After that, I couldn't play anymore. Every note reminded me of him, of what we'd lost. Elena stared into her tea. So I disappeared. Changed my name back to my maiden name, moved somewhere no one would look for a famous pianist, and ended up here, Lou finished. And ended up here, Elena agreed. It was peaceful until Richard assigned me that piece. Lou considered her for a moment. You know, my wife has cancer. The abrupt change of subject startled Elena. I'm sorry to hear that. 5th time it's come back, Lou continued matter-of-factly. Doctors say it might be the last round. But you know what she asked for last week? Tickets to a piano recital. Said music helps her forget the pain, even if just for a little while. Elena said nothing, but her throat tightened. I'm not saying you owe the world your talent, Lou said gently, but maybe your husband wouldn't want it buried either. They sat in silence as the coffee shop bustled around them. Outside, the sky darkened into evening. I should go, Elena said finally. Lou nodded. Think about what I said, and if you want tickets to that recital, let me know. My wife would love to meet you. As Elena drove home, her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. For 3 years, she had run from her past. Now it had caught up with her in the most unexpected way. That night, for the first time since the accident, Elena pulled out a photo of her husband. His kind eyes seemed to look right at her, full of the love and pride she remembered. What would you want me to do? She whispered to the empty room. Elena didn't go to school the next day. She called in sick, something she'd never done before. The thought of facing Richard and the other teachers felt impossible after yesterday's confrontation. Instead, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, staring at her husband's photo. I miss you so much, David, she whispered. The apartment was quiet except for the gentle ticking of the wall clock and occasional car sounds from the street below. Elena had chosen this place for its plainness, its lack of character, a blank canvas where she could disappear. Now it felt like a cage. Her phone had been buzzing with messages all morning. Vivian had texted 3 times, each message more concerned than the last. There were also emails from Richard about returning sheet music and collecting her belongings from the music room. Around noon, a knock on her door startled her. Elena ignored it at first, but the knocking persisted. Elena, it's Vivian. I know you're in there. Your car's outside. With a sigh, Elena went to the door but didn't open it. I'm not feeling well, Vivian. I brought soup, Vivian replied. And information. Curiosity won out. Elena opened the door to find Vivian holding a paper bag and wearing a determined expression. You look terrible, Vivian said, pushing past her into the apartment. But not sick. Sit down while I heat this up. Too tired to argue. Elena returned to the kitchen table while Vivian busied herself finding bowls and spoons. So, Vivian said as she poured soup into 2 bowls. Want to tell me what really happened yesterday? The teacher gossip mill has at least 5 different versions circulating. What's the most popular theory? Elena asked. That you and Richard had a huge fight about artistic interpretation, and you stormed out declaring you wouldn't play a single note for such a Philistine. Vivian set the bowls on the table and sat down. But I know you better than that. You're too polite to storm out. Despite everything, Elena smiled faintly. You're right about that part. So what really happened? Elena stirred her soup, considering how much to share. Richard thinks I've been holding back, not playing to my full ability. And have you been? The direct question caught Elena off guard. She looked up to find Vivian watching her intently. Yes, she admitted. I have. Vivian nodded, unsurprised. I thought so. Even I could tell something was off, and I can barely play chopsticks. The question is, why? Elena took a deep breath. After telling Lou yesterday, the words came easier now. I used to be a concert pianist. Before I started teaching. Used to be? Vivian raised an eyebrow. Talent like that doesn't just disappear. No, but people can choose to walk away from it. Elena's voice was soft but firm. Because of David? Vivian asked gently. Elena's head snapped up. How do you know about David? I didn't until just now, Vivian admitted. But you mentioned that name when I came in. I heard you through the door. Elena stared into her soup. He was my husband. And my manager. He died 3 years ago. I'm sorry, Vivian said, reaching across the table to squeeze Elena's hand. Truly. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Vivian spoke again. So Richard replaced you with Dr. Wallace's son, and now you're hiding in your apartment. I'm not hiding, Elena protested weakly. I needed a day to think. About what? About who I am. Who I want to be. Elena pushed her bowl away. For 3 years, I've been running from my past. Maybe it's time to stop running. Vivian smiled. That sounds promising. Also, there's something you should know. She pulled out her phone. I wasn't completely honest about why I came over. Oh? Last night after you left, Lou the janitor talked to Dr. Wallace. Vivian held up her phone, showing an email. This went out to all staff about an hour ago. Elena took the phone and read, Faculty and staff. Due to an extraordinary discovery, we are making a last-minute change to our showcase program. Dr. Wallace has invited a special guest performer who will join us for the finale. All faculty are required to attend a special meeting tomorrow at 4 p.m. in the auditorium for further details. Richard West, Music Department. Elena frowned. A special guest performer? What does this have to do with me? Lou told Dr. Wallace who you really are, Vivian explained. Apparently, you're quite famous in classical music circles. I was, Elena corrected. Past tense. Well, Dr. Wallace nearly had a heart attack when she found out. She looked you up online and found videos of your performances. Vivian leaned forward. The special guest performer is you, Elena. They want you to play as yourself. As Elena Chen, concert pianist. Elena's stomach dropped. No, absolutely not. Why not? Because I left that life behind for a reason. Elena stood up, pacing the small kitchen. I can't just go back to being that person. No one's asking you to go back, Vivian said calmly. Just to stop pretending you're less than you are for one night. Elena stopped pacing. It's not that simple. It never is, Vivian agreed. But think about it. Your students will be there. They're already disappointed you won't be performing. Imagine what it would mean to them to see their English teacher reveal this incredible talent. They'll feel deceived, Elena argued. Everyone will. Or inspired, Vivian countered. Sometimes the people we think we know have depths we never imagined. That's a powerful lesson, isn't it? Isn't that what literature teaches us? Elena sat back down, conflicted. I don't have to decide right now. True, Vivian nodded. But the meeting is tomorrow at 4. And knowing Richard, he's already printed new programs with your name, your full name, on them. After Vivian left, Elena sat at her keyboard, not playing, just resting her fingers on the silent keys. For 3 years, she had locked away not just her grief, but her identity. Being Elena Chen, pianist, meant being Elena Chen, widow. The two were inseparable in her mind. She opened her laptop and, for the first time since the accident, typed her own name into a search engine. Thousands of results appeared. Concert reviews, recordings, interviews, and news articles about her mysterious disappearance from the classical music world. One headline caught her eye. Renowned pianist Elena Chen still missing 3 years after husband's death. The article speculated that she might have died by suicide, unable to cope with her loss. Others suggested she had suffered a career-ending injury in the same accident that killed her husband. A few even proposed wild conspiracy theories involving witness protection programs. None had guessed she was simply teaching high school English in a small town, deliberately playing piano poorly for a faculty talent show. When put that way, her situation seemed almost absurd. Elena closed the laptop and picked up her phone. She had one more unread message, from Lou. My wife would be honored to meet you whether you perform or not. Her name is Irene. She kept your concert program all these years. Attached was a photo of a smiling older woman holding a yellowed program from Carnegie Hall. Despite her obviously frail condition, her eyes shone with life. Something broke open inside Elena. The thought of this woman, fighting for her life, finding joy in music, in Elena's music, touched her deeply. What right did she have to bury her gift when it could bring such happiness to others? David had always told her that her playing was her greatest gift to the world. "Your music speaks what words cannot," he would say after concerts. "Never stop playing, Elena. The world needs your voice." For the first time in 3 years, Elena allowed herself to really hear his words. Would David want her to stop playing because he was gone? Or would he want her music to continue, perhaps now carrying even deeper emotion and meaning? That night, Elena made a decision. She couldn't go back to her old life. The constant travel, the pressure, the public scrutiny. But perhaps she didn't need to hide anymore either. The next day, Elena returned to school, ignoring the curious looks and whispers that followed her through the hallways. Her students seemed relieved to see her, though they asked no questions about her absence. At precisely 4 o'clock, Elena walked into the auditorium. The entire faculty was already seated, along with Dr. Wallace, Richard, and several members of the school board. On the stage stood a gleaming grand piano, not the upright from the music room, but a concert grand that must have been rented for the occasion. Richard spotted her first, his face lighting up with relief. He hurried over. "Elena, thank goodness. We weren't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," she admitted. "Before you say anything," Richard said quickly, "I want to apologize. I handled things badly yesterday. I was frustrated, but that's no excuse for how I spoke to you." "You were right, though," Elena said quietly. "I wasn't being honest about who I am or what I can do." Dr. Wallace approached, her usually stern face softened with something like awe. "Ms. Chen, or should I say Maestra Chen, we are so honored that you've been teaching at our school." Elena shook her head. "Please, just Elena is fine. And I'm still just an English teacher." "An English teacher who happens to be one of the most brilliant pianists of her generation," Dr. Wallace countered. "Lou showed me your performances online. Why didn't you tell us who you were?" "It's complicated," Elena said, "but I'm ready to explain if you'll let me." Dr. Wallace gestured to the assembled faculty. "We're all ears." Elena looked around at the faces watching her, Vivian's encouraging smile, Richard's curious gaze, and at the back of the room, Lou standing with a frail woman in a wheelchair who must be Irene. Taking a deep breath, Elena walked to the center of the room. "My name is Elena Chen," she began. 3 years ago, I lost my husband in a car accident after a concert in Vienna. He was also my manager and my biggest supporter. After his death, I couldn't bear to play anymore. Every note reminded me of him, so I disappeared from the concert world and tried to build a new life where no one knew me as a pianist." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I came here to teach literature, my other passion. When Richard asked me to play for the showcase, I panicked. I didn't want anyone to know about my past, so I pretended to be less skilled than I am." "I'm sorry for the deception," Richard stepped forward. "Elena, we've invited you here today to ask if you would reconsider performing at the showcase. Not as a faculty member struggling with a difficult piece, but as yourself, Elena Chen, concert pianist. It would be an incredible honor for our school." Elena looked at the grand piano on the stage, then back at Lou and Irene. Irene gave her a small, encouraging nod. "Before I answer," Elena said, "I'd like to play something for all of you. Not Rachmaninoff, but a piece I haven't played in 3 years. It was my husband's favorite." Without waiting for a response, Elena walked to the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. And for the first time since David died, she played with her whole heart. The night of the showcase arrived with an unusual buzz of excitement. The school parking lot was full, with cars lining the nearby streets. Inside the auditorium, parents, students, and community members filled the seats, many holding programs with Elena's name prominently featured. Word had spread quickly. The local newspaper had run a front-page story about the world-renowned pianist teaching in our midst, complete with photos from Elena's concert days. Former students of Westfield High had shared the news on social media. Amazed that the quiet English substitute had once performed at Carnegie Hall and with the London Philharmonic daughter backstage, performers hurried about in a flurry of last-minute preparations. The choir straightened their robes, the band members adjusted their instruments, And Dr. Wallace's son paced nervously, still scheduled to play his piece despite Elena's return to the program. Elena sat alone in a small practice room, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple black dress, not the elaborate gowns of her concert days, but something elegant enough to honor the occasion. On a chair beside her lay the sheet music for Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, though she wouldn't need it. The notes were as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. The door opened to reveal Lou, dressed in a suit rather than his usual janitor's uniform. "Just wanted to check if you need anything," he said. "Water? Tea?" Elena smiled. "I'm fine, thank you. How's Irene?" "Excited," Lou replied. "She's in the front row. The doctors didn't want her to come, but she insisted. Said wild horses couldn't keep her away. I'm glad she's here," Elena said sincerely. "She's part of the reason I'm doing this." Lou nodded. "There's someone else who'd like to see you if you're up for it." "Who?" "My nephew, Thomas. He's 12 and just started piano lessons. Finding out you've been here has kind of rocked his world." Elena laughed softly. "Send him in." Lou disappeared briefly, returning with a boy whose eyes widened at the sight of Elena. "Ms. Chen," he stammered. "I saw your videos online. You're amazing." "Thank you, Thomas. I hear you play piano too." The boy nodded enthusiastically. "I just started 6 months ago. My teacher says I have talent, but..." He looked down at his hands. "It's so hard sometimes. My fingers don't always do what I want them to." Elena gestured for him to sit beside her. "Can I tell you a secret? Every pianist feels that way, even after years of practice." "Really? Even you?" "Especially me," Elena said. "The music in our heads is always more perfect than what our fingers can produce. That's what keeps us practicing." Thomas considered this, then asked, "Why did you stop playing concerts? You could be famous." The innocent question might have stung a few days ago, but now Elena found she could answer honestly without pain overwhelming her. "I lost someone I loved very much," she explained, "and for a while music reminded me too much of him. But I'm learning that music can also help us heal." Thomas nodded solemnly. "My dad says music is like magic that way." "Your dad is wise," Elena smiled. "Now I should prepare. But thank you for visiting me, Thomas. It means a lot." After they left, Elena closed her eyes and did something she hadn't done in years, her pre-concert ritual. 3 deep breaths, a moment of silence for the composers whose work she would play, and a whispered promise to honor the music with her whole heart. For the first time, she added a new element to the ritual. "This is for you, David," she whispered. "And for me." The showcase began promptly at 7. From backstage, Elena could hear the performances. The choir's harmonies, the band's enthusiastic playing, solos both confident and nervous. She smiled at how differently she experienced the event now, no longer hiding but preparing to step fully into the light. Richard approached as the penultimate performer took the stage. "You're next," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," Elena admitted. "But a good nervous, the kind I used to feel before concerts." "The auditorium is packed," Richard told her. "Some people from the State Symphony drove in when they heard you were performing. And there's a talent scout from the Music Conservatory." Elena tensed slightly. "Richard, I'm not looking to restart my career. Tonight is about making peace with my past, not returning to it." "Of course," he backpedaled quickly. "I just meant, people are excited to hear you play again." The audience applauded as the previous performance ended. Dr. Wallace stepped onto the stage to introduce the final act. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my extraordinary privilege to introduce our closing performer. Many of you came tonight after hearing the remarkable story that has unfolded in our school this past week. Others may be learning it for the first time." She paused, looking toward the wings where Elena waited. 3 years ago, the classical music world lost one of its brightest stars when Elena Chen disappeared from public life, following a personal tragedy. What none of us knew until recently was that Ms. Chen has been right here, teaching literature to our students, touching lives in a different but equally meaningful way. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Tonight, for the first time since her retirement from the concert stage, Elena Chen will perform Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. Please join me in welcoming her back to the piano. The applause was thunderous as Elena walked onto the stage. Camera flashes sparkled from the audience. and she could see students pointing excitedly, whispering to their parents. Elena approached the magnificent grand piano at center stage and bowed slightly. As she sat down, she caught sight of Lou and Irene in the front row. Irene gave her a small wave, her eyes already glistening with tears of anticipation. Taking a deep breath, Elena placed her hands on the keys. The audience fell silent, the air charged with expectation. Then she began to play. From the first powerful chords, Elena knew this performance would be different from any she had given before. She wasn't playing for critics or acclaim or even for the audience. She was playing for herself, for David, for the music that had shaped her life. Her fingers found each note with perfect precision, but it was the emotion flowing through them that transformed the piece. The famous prelude told the story of a journey, from darkness to light, from despair to hope, and Elena poured her own journey into every measure. When she reached the thunderous middle section that had betrayed her true abilities during rehearsal, she held nothing back. The sound filled every corner of the auditorium, powerful and raw. Then, as the piece moved toward its conclusion, her touch became more delicate, the final notes ringing with a clarity that seemed to hang in the air even after her hands lifted from the keys. For a moment, absolute silence filled the room. Elena remained still, eyes closed, letting the last echoes of the music fade within her. Then the audience erupted. The standing ovation began in the front row with Irene struggling to her feet, supported by Lou, and spread like wildfire through the auditorium. Students who had never shown interest in classical music were on their feet cheering. Teachers who had known Elena only as a quiet colleague applauded wildly. Elena stood and bowed, her eyes bright with unshed tears. As the applause continued, Richard rushed on stage with a bouquet of flowers, followed by Dr. Wallace. "That was extraordinary," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Dr. Wallace stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special request. Ms. Chen has agreed to play one additional piece, not listed in your programs." Elena returned to the piano, adjusting the microphone that had been placed near her. "This next piece is very dear to my heart," she said, her voice soft but steady. "It's called David's Lullaby. I composed it for my husband when we were first married, and it was the last thing I played for him before he died." A hush fell over the audience. "I haven't played it since that night," Elena continued, "but I think it's time to let it be heard again." The melody that flowed from her fingers was simple yet profoundly moving, a love letter in musical form. Unlike the technical brilliance of Rachmaninoff, this piece spoke directly from Elena's heart, intimate and personal. When the final note faded, there wasn't immediate applause. Instead, a collective breath seemed to move through the audience, a shared moment of emotion before they again rose to their feet. After multiple curtain calls, Elena finally made her way backstage. Her students were waiting, their faces alight with excitement and questions. "Ms. Chen, why didn't you tell us? Will you still be our teacher? Can you play for our class sometime?" Elena laughed, overwhelmed by their enthusiasm. "Yes, I'll still be your teacher. Literature is still my passion. And yes, maybe I'll play for class occasionally." As the crowd dispersed, Vivian approached with Lou and Irene. Irene reached for Elena's hand from her wheelchair. "Your playing is even more beautiful than I remembered," she said. "It was worth fighting to be here tonight." "I'm honored you came," Elena replied, squeezing her hand gently. "What happens next?" Vivian asked. "I saw you talking to some important-looking people," Elena smiled. "Life goes on. I'll keep teaching. But maybe I'll also give small recitals occasionally. Nothing like my former touring schedule, but enough to share the music again. Balance." Lou nodded approvingly. "That's what life's about, isn't it?" Later that night, after declining numerous invitations to celebration dinners, Elena returned to her apartment. She placed the bouquet of flowers in a vase and sat at her keyboard. Without turning it on, she traced the keys with her fingertips, feeling a peace she hadn't known in years. On the wall beside her, she hung a new frame containing a photo of David alongside the program from tonight's showcase. Past and present side by side. "I think I found my way back," she whispered to the photo. "Not to where I was, but to who I am." Outside her window, the stars shone brightly in the clear night sky. Elena opened the window and let the cool breeze fill her apartment. Tomorrow, she would return to her classroom, face her students' questions, and begin this new chapter of her life, no longer hiding, no longer running, but moving forward with music once again in her heart. For now, though, she simply sat in the quiet, listening to the night sounds of the town that had become her home, and feeling, for the first time in 3 years, that she was exactly where she was meant to be.